The acrid scent of sulfur permeated the air of Vega 9's mining station, mingling with the sterile metallic undertones of industrial-grade air filtration. Jake Harlow wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes stinging slightly from the 14-hour shift. 3 years on this desolate rock, and he still hadn't fully acclimated to the harsh conditions. But the pay was good, exceptional, actually, and opportunities for advancement weren't exactly plentiful for someone with his background back on Earth. Mineral composition analysis complete. Phasium concentration at 73%. Acceptable extraction parameters, announced his Vexian colleague, Nyx Terran, her orange-hued fingers dancing over the holographic display with practiced precision. Her specialized gauntlets interfaced seamlessly with the station's technology, enabling her to process data with remarkable efficiency. Jake nodded, stealing a glance at his silent companion. Nyx was the epitome of Vexian discipline, focused, methodical, and perpetually unreadable. Her vibrant orange skin contrasted sharply with the dull gray of the control room, making her presence impossible to ignore despite her quiet demeanor. 3 years working alongside her, and Jake still felt like he barely knew her. The other Earthworkers had nicknamed her the Ice Queen, but Jake had always sensed something more beneath that composed exterior. "Looks like we're ahead of schedule," Jake remarked, stretching his cramped muscles. "Sector 12 yields are up 15% from last quarter. Management should be pleased." Nyx responded with a curt nod, her large, pupilless golden eyes briefly meeting his before returning to the control panel. "The extraction rate is optimal. Your recalibration of the drilling parameters has proven effective." Jake grinned. From Nyx, this was practically effusive praise. "I'm starving," he announced, pushing away from his station. "Want to grab something at the mess hall? I heard the new cook makes a decent protein loaf." "New cook?" Nyx inquired, her voice betraying a hint of interest. "Yeah, Sarah. She just transferred in from the Europa station. Morgan says her cooking is the best thing to happen to this rock since they discovered Phasium." Jake chuckled, already imagining the relative feast awaiting them. After weeks of bland nutrition packets, the prospect of actual flavored food was nothing short of miraculous. The change in Nyx was instantaneous and alarming. Her golden eyes flashed, the vertical pupils constricting to thin slits. A low hum emanated from her throat, a sound Jake had never heard her make before, and without warning, her gauntleted fist slammed into the auxiliary control panel with crushing force. The impact was devastating. The panel shattered, sending sparks flying across the control room as circuits overloaded and systems crashed. Emergency lights bathed the room in an eerie red glow as damage control protocols initiated automatically. "Nyx! What the hell?" Jake shouted, diving toward the primary systems to prevent cascade failures. "What's wrong with you?" But the Vexian was already storming out, leaving Jake alone with the blaring alarms and the smoking ruins of essential equipment. His heart pounded as he frantically worked to stabilize the remaining systems, utterly bewildered by what had just transpired. In 3 years, he'd never seen Nyx lose control, not even during the methane pocket incident that had nearly killed half their shift. What had he said? What could possibly have triggered such a violent reaction? As Jake stared at the destruction, the station's intercom crackled to life. "Control Room 7, report status immediately. We're showing critical failures across auxiliary systems. Repeat, report status immediately." Jake swallowed hard, knowing this was going to be one hell of a report to file. "So, let me get this straight," Supervisor Krell growled, his massive frame looming over Jake in the cramped office. "You're claiming full responsibility for the destruction of a 70,000 credit control panel?" Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Yes, sir. I wasn't paying proper attention to the pressure readings and overcompensated." Krell's eyes, small and dark in his bulbous green head, narrowed suspiciously. "That doesn't sound like you, Harlow. 3 years, not a single incident. And suddenly you destroy critical equipment? And where was Taryn during all this? She was checking readings in Sector 10, Jake lied, avoiding eye contact. He wasn't entirely sure why he was covering for Nyx, but something told him her reaction, while inexplicable, wasn't malicious. I was alone when it happened. Krill didn't seem convinced, but he made a notation on his tablet. Well, this will go in your permanent record. Repairs will take at least 48 hours, and I'm assigning you both to maintenance duty until the panel is operational again. Dismissed. Jake exited the office, relief washing over him, only to be immediately replaced by frustration. Why had he taken the fall for Nyx's outburst? And more pressingly, where was she now? Hey, Earthboy, I heard you went full demolition expert on Control Room 7. Jake turned to find Morgan Clyde, the station's resident geologist, and the closest thing he had to a friend on Vega 9, leaning against a corridor wall, with a knowing smirk. News travels fast, Jake grumbled. On a station with 200 people? Lightning speed. Morgan fell into step beside him. But I'm not buying it. Word is, Nyx was seen storming out of that control room like she had hell on her heels. Jake glanced around nervously, ensuring they weren't overheard. Look, I don't know what happened. We were talking. I mentioned Sarah from the kitchen, and Nyx just exploded. Morgan stopped abruptly, staring at Jake with widening eyes before bursting into laughter. What? Jake demanded, irritation flaring. What's so damn funny? Oh, you poor, oblivious idiot, Morgan wheezed, wiping tears from her eyes. You really don't know. Know what? Morgan pulled him into an alcove, lowering her voice. Nyx has been giving you the Vexian signals for 3 years. Jake, 3 years. Vexian. Signals? Jake repeated, confusion evident. Mating signals, Morgan clarified with exaggerated patience. Courting behavior. She's been practically throwing herself at you, in Vexian terms. Jake's mouth fell open. That's ridiculous. She barely speaks to me outside of work procedures. Because that's the Vexian way. They don't do casual flirtation like humans. It's all subtle cues. Eye contact duration, body positioning, resource sharing. Remember when she calibrated your environmental suit last month? Or when she always manages to be assigned to your shift despite being qualified for supervisor positions? Or how she brings you that bitter Vexian tea you pretend to like? Jake's mind raced, reassessing 3 years of interactions through this new lens. But she's so reserved, so professional. That's the point. Vexians don't show romantic interest through emotional displays. It's about actions, consistency, and small gestures. Their culture values restraint. The fact that she lost control enough to smash equipment. Morgan shook her head. That's not just interest. Jake, that's serious attachment. And mentioning Sarah triggered this? Jake asked, still struggling to process. You essentially told your secret Vexian admirer that you were excited about another female. In their culture, once courting signals have been established, acknowledging another potential mate is deeply offensive. Morgan patted his shoulder sympathetically. You've got some serious cultural bridge building to do. Jake leaned against the wall, overwhelmed. How do I fix this? First, you need to find her. Then, maybe learn something about Vexian courting customs before you open your mouth again, Morgan suggested. And Jake, be gentle. She just showed you her heart in the most vulnerable way possible for a Vexian. With a heavy sigh, Jake pushed himself off the wall. Right. Thanks for the cultural education. Don't mention it. And Jake? Morgan called after him. For what it's worth, you could do worse. Nyx is respected by every species on this station. That means something out here. Jake nodded, his mind already racing with what he would say when he found Nyx, assuming she would even speak to him. Finding her proved more difficult than expected. Nyx wasn't in any of her usual haunts, Not the xenobotany lab where she sometimes spent breaks. Not the observation deck where she often stood watching Vega 9's 3 moons. Not even her quarters when Jake resorted to buzzing her door. She had effectively vanished. As Jake searched, the station's atmosphere felt increasingly oppressive. The recycled air seemed thinner, the corridors narrower. He was painfully aware of curious glances and hushed conversations that ceased when he approached. Word had spread, it seemed, though what version of events was circulating remained unclear. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, Jake headed to the maintenance sector, where they'd been assigned punishment duty. He found the area deserted, except for a stocky technician rewiring an access panel. "Seen Nix Terran?" Jake asked. The technician barely looked up. "Orange Vexian? Stormed through about an hour ago, grabbed a pressure suit, and headed to the exterior maintenance airlock. Wouldn't talk to anyone." Jake's stomach tightened with concern. Exterior maintenance during Vega 9's night cycle was technically permitted, but strongly discouraged due to the planet's extreme temperature fluctuations and unpredictable atmospheric conditions. "Thanks," he muttered, already heading toward the airlock. He was halfway there when the station's alarms blared to life. Not the controlled emergency protocols from earlier, but the frantic, pulsing wail of an active crisis. "Attention all personnel," the automated system announced. "Containment breach detected in Sector 12. Facium reaction instability detected. All non-emergency personnel evacuate immediately. Repeat, containment breach in Sector 12. Jake froze. Sector 12, their primary extraction zone, where the highest concentration of volatile facium was processed. Where Nix might be right now. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the emergency response lockers, grabbing a protective suit and equipment around him. Station personnel were moving in the opposite direction, following evacuation protocols. Several called out to him, but Jake ignored them, focused solely on reaching Sector 12. The doors to the mining sector were already in lockdown mode, but Jake's engineer clearance allowed him access. As he approached the final barrier, the heat was palpable, even through his protective gear. Warning lights flashed across every surface, and the acrid smell of burning chemicals permeated even the suit's filtration system. When the doors parted, chaos greeted him. The extraction chamber was filled with toxic smoke, illuminated by emergency lighting and the ominous orange glow of overheating equipment. At the center of the chamber, the massive drilling apparatus continued to operate, though its movements had become erratic and dangerous. And there, struggling with the manual override at the base of the drill, was Nix. Her pressure suit was already showing signs of damage, scorch marks along one arm, a cracked visor that must have compromised her air supply. "Nix!" Jake shouted through the comm system. "Get out of there! The cooling system is failing!" Her voice came back, broken by static. "Cannot. Containment field. Collapse. The phasium. Will ignite atmosphere." Jake understood immediately. If the containment field around the phasium deposits failed completely, the resulting chain reaction could destroy half the station. Nix was trying to manually disengage the drilling arm to prevent further destabilization. "The cooling system," Jake called out. "I can reroute power from secondary systems. Hold on." He fought his way to the environmental control station, fingers flying over the interface. The system was locked in automated failure mode, but Jake had spent enough off-hours studying the station's architecture to know the backdoor protocols. Sweat poured down his face inside his helmet as he worked, the heat intensifying with each passing second. "Jake," Nix's voice crackled through the comm. "You need to evacuate. I can handle this." "Not a chance," he replied, finally breaking through the security protocols. "Got it. Rerouting power from residential sectors. Cooling systems coming back online in 3, 2, 1. A momentary silence. Then, the blessed sound of cryogenic pumps reactivating. The chamber's temperature indicator began a slow descent. "It's working!" Jake exclaimed. "Nix, How's the drilling arm? No response. Nix, do you copy? Through the thinning smoke, Jake could see that Nix was no longer at the control panel. His heart lurched as he spotted her orange pressure suit. Now, she was trapped beneath a fallen section of scaffolding near the extraction pit. Nix! Jake raced across the chamber, navigating through damaged equipment and fallen debris. When he reached her, he could see that the scaffolding had pinned her legs, dangerously close to the edge of the extraction pit, where molten materials still bubbled ominously. I'm here, he assured her, examining the wreckage. I'll get you out. Jake, her voice was weak. The pressure is building again, the cooling system. Temporary solution only. She was right. The warning indicators were already climbing again. The system was too damaged. His patch was just buying them minutes. Then we work fast, Jake said, positioning himself to lift the heaviest beam. On 3. 1, 2, 3. With a grunt of exertion, he lifted the metal just enough for Nix to pull herself free. Her movement dislodged some debris, sending it tumbling into the extraction pit below. The facium reacted violently, sending a plume of white-hot energy skyward. We need to move now, Jake shouted, helping Nix to her feet. Her suit was compromised, and he could see orange blood seeping through tears in the material. They had barely made it halfway across the chamber when a secondary explosion rocked the pit behind them. The force sent them both sprawling. Jake rolled to his feet quickly, but Nix collapsed, her injured leg giving out. Without hesitation, Jake lifted her into his arms, surprising himself with the strength adrenaline provided. The exit was still 30 meters away, and the chamber was deteriorating rapidly. Pieces of ceiling were coming down around them, and the temperature was spiking again despite the cooling systems. Leave me, Nix insisted, her golden eyes meeting his through their visors. You can't carry me fast enough. Watch me, Jake growled, pushing forward with renewed determination. 20 meters. The ground beneath them shuddered as another pocket of facium ignited. 10 meters. A support beam crashed down just behind them, missing them by inches. 5 meters. The door ahead began its automatic closure sequence, emergency protocols taking over. With a final burst of speed, Jake lunged forward, barely clearing the threshold as the reinforced doors slammed shut behind them. The sound of the explosion on the other side was muffled, but unmistakable. They had escaped with seconds to spare. Jake collapsed against the corridor wall, still cradling Nix. For several moments, they simply breathed, the reality of their narrow escape washing over them. You should have left me, Nix finally said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. Jake looked down at her, suddenly aware of how close they were, how her weight felt in his arms. Not a chance, he replied. We're partners. Partners don't leave each other behind. Something flickered in Nix's golden eyes, an emotion Jake couldn't quite identify. Before he could process it, medical personnel were swarming around them, separating them onto stretchers, rushing them toward the medical bay. As they were wheeled in opposite directions, Jake caught one last glimpse of Nix looking back at him, an unmistakable vulnerability in her expression that he'd never seen before. The medical bay hummed with quiet efficiency as Jake stared at the ceiling, counting the panels for the 27th time. Dr. Elias had treated his minor burns and scrapes efficiently, administered a detox shot for facium radiation exposure, and ordered 12 hours of observation. Jake suspected the latter was less about medical necessity and more about keeping him contained until Supervisor Krell decided what to do with him. Your vital signs are remarkably stable, considering the exposure, Dr. Elias commented, reviewing Jake's readings. The physician's spindly, six-fingered hands moved with practiced precision over the medical scanner. You Earthers have surprising resilience. How's Nix? Jake asked, ignoring the doctor's clinical observations. Dr. Elias's expression shifted subtly. Technician Terran is recovering well. Vexian physiology processes toxins more efficiently than human systems. Though her physical injuries were more severe, the leg will require regenerative therapy. Can I see her? She's requested privacy, Dr. Elias replied, though something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. However, I have been authorized to discuss another matter with you. He activated the privacy field around Jake's bed, the soft hum indicating they could now speak without being overheard. The incident in Sector 12 was not an accident, Dr. Elias said quietly. Preliminary analysis shows evidence of deliberate sabotage to the cooling system. Someone wanted that phasium pocket to destabilize. Jake pushed himself up, wincing as his bruised ribs protested. Sabotage? Who would— That's what Supervisor Krell would like you to help determine, Dr. Elias interrupted. Your actions today, while reckless, demonstrated exceptional loyalty to the station, and your relationship with Technician Terran puts you in a unique position to assist with the investigation. Jake felt his face warm. We don't have a relationship, we're colleagues. Dr. Elias made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. I've treated enough species to recognize certain physiological responses. Mr. Harlow, your elevated heart rate whenever Technician Terran is mentioned suggests otherwise. But that's beside the point. He handed Jake a data pad. You and Technician Terran are being temporarily assigned to a special security detail, effective immediately after medical release. Jake scanned the orders, eyebrows rising. Security Oversight Committee, but we're minors, not security personnel. You are now— Dr. Elias's expression turned grave. The sabotage suggests we have someone working against station interests, possibly for the Orion Syndicate. They've been after our phasium reserves for years. We need people we can trust investigating, and your actions today put you on that very short list. And Nyx, she's agreed to this? She was the one who requested you as her partner for the assignment. Jake felt something warm bloom in his chest. After everything that had happened, the control panel, the miscommunication, the near-death experience, she still wanted to work with him. When do we start? Tomorrow morning. For now, rest. Dr. Elias deactivated the privacy field. And Jake? Technician Terran is in Bay 3 if you feel well enough to walk. Jake waited until Dr. Elias had moved on to his next patient, before gingerly swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Every muscle protested, but he pushed through the discomfort, driven by the need to see Nyx, to make sure she was truly all right. Bay 3 was dimly lit, adjusted to the light sensitivity Vexians experienced after trauma. Jake hesitated at the entrance, suddenly uncertain. What would he say? How could he even begin to address the cascade of misunderstandings and revelations of the past 24 hours? Before he could decide, a soft voice called from within. I can sense your presence. Jake Harlow, you may enter. Nyx was propped up on a medical bed, her injured leg suspended in a regeneration field, without her usual work uniform, dressed only in the simple medical garments. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Her orange skin seemed paler, the golden eyes more subdued. Hey, Jake said, awkwardly hovering near the door. You should be resting, Nyx observed, though there was no reproach in her tone. So should you. He moved closer, taking the seat beside her bed. How's the leg? It will heal. Vexian regeneration is efficient. She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were uncharacteristically bare of her specialized gauntlets. I must express gratitude for your actions in Sector 12. Your intervention saved my life. You would have done the same for me. Yes, I would have. The simplicity of her affirmation struck Jake more powerfully than any elaborate human expression of gratitude could have. A silence stretched between them, pregnant with unspoken words. Nyx, about what happened in the control room. I behaved shamefully, she interrupted, her voice tight. I failed to maintain proper Vexian discipline. It was inexcusable. No, I was the one who— You were unaware of cultural significances, she continued, The fault was entirely mine. In 3 cycles of working together, I neglected to properly communicate my intentions. Jake took a deep breath. Morgan explained some things to me about Vexian courtship signals. Nyx's golden eyes widened slightly, a hint of darker orange, the Vexian equivalent of a blush, spreading across her cheeks. I see. Then you understand why my reaction to your mention of the new food preparation technician was excessive. I think I'm starting to, Jake said gently. But I'd like to hear it from you, if you're willing to explain. Nyx's fingers twisted together in an uncharacteristic display of nervousness. Vexians do not express romantic interest casually. When we identify a potential mate, we demonstrate our interest through consistent, deliberate actions, rather than direct verbal communication. I have been indicating such interest in you for 3 Earth years. Jake felt a twinge of guilt. And I completely missed every signal. Your species communicates differently. I should have adapted my approach. Nyx's gaze met his directly. When you expressed enthusiasm about the female technician Sarah, it triggered an emotional response I was unprepared for. Vexians rarely experience jealousy, but when we do, it is intense. So the control panel was the unfortunate recipient of emotions I could not properly contain. A hint of wry humor colored her tone. I am still learning to balance Vexian discipline with the more expressive aspects of my nature. Jake found himself smiling. I'm sorry I was too dense to notice your signals. And for what it's worth, I wasn't interested in Sarah. I was just excited about the possibility of food with actual flavor. This drew a small smile from Nyx, a rare and precious sight that transformed her features. I understand now, and Dr. Elias has informed me of our new assignment. Yeah, about that. You requested me specifically? You demonstrated exceptional courage and loyalty today. There is no one on this station I would trust more to help uncover the truth about the sabotage. Nyx hesitated, then added softly. And perhaps this assignment will allow us to better understand each other's cultures and intentions. Jake felt warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with his injuries. I'd like that. Before either could say more, a soft chime indicated the end of visiting hours. Jake reluctantly stood, wincing at his protesting muscles. Rest well, Nyx. I'll see you tomorrow for our first security briefing. As he turned to leave, Nyx called after him. Jake, the 3 moons of Vega 9 will be aligned tomorrow night. In Vexian culture, it is considered a fortuitous time for new beginnings. The invitation in her words was unmistakable. Jake smiled. I'll meet you at the observation deck. Then, after our shift. As he walked back to his medical bay, Jake reflected on how dramatically his world had changed in a single day. From routine mining operations to sabotage investigations, from cultural misunderstandings to the possibility of something he'd never imagined developing with his enigmatic Vexian colleague. Whatever came next, Jake suspected life on Vega 9 was about to become far more interesting than he'd ever anticipated. The following morning brought the harsh reality of their new assignment into sharp focus. Supervisor Krell had requisitioned a small, windowless room for their investigative headquarters, little more than a storage closet with 2 terminals and a hollow projection table. Not exactly the security command center, Jake commented as he limped into the room, still sore from the previous day's ordeal. Nyx was already present, her injured leg supported by a slender exoskeleton that assisted with weight bearing, while the regenerative therapy continued its work. She had resumed wearing her specialized gauntlets, though Jake noticed she had removed the left one when typing on her terminal, a small concession to comfort he'd never seen her make before. Supervisor Krell wishes to maintain secrecy regarding our investigation, she explained. The saboteur may have accomplices. This location is not on the station's main network. Jake nodded, taking the seat across from her. The air between them felt different, charged with a new awareness that made mundane interactions suddenly significant. "So, where do we start?" he asked, forcing his mind back to the task at hand. "I have compiled a list of all personnel with access to Sector 12 cooling systems within the past 14 days. Nix transferred the data to the holoprojector, revealing a list of 27 names. "We must also review maintenance logs, security footage, and shift rotations." Jake whistled. "That's a lot of data to sift through. Hence why we have been granted a 48-hour reprieve from regular duties." Nix hesitated, then added, "I appreciate your willingness to undertake this assignment with me, especially given recent events." Jake met her gaze steadily. "Recent events only convince me there's no one I'd rather work with." The subtle darkening of her orange skin told him she understood his meaning. They settled into their work with professional focus, reviewing logs and footage, cross-referencing access codes and locations. By midday, they had eliminated 12 names from their list, personnel whose whereabouts during critical timeframes were verifiably elsewhere. "The sabotage was sophisticated," Nix observed, studying a technical breakdown of the cooling system's failure points. "The saboteur understood both our systems and Facium properties. So we're looking for someone with technical expertise and knowledge of mining operations," Jake said, frowning as he scrolled through the remaining names. "That still leaves us with too many suspects." "Perhaps we are approaching this incorrectly," Nix suggested. "If the Orion Syndicate is involved, they would likely infiltrate using a position that provides access, but doesn't attract scrutiny." Jake considered this. "Someone who can move freely through different sections without raising suspicion." They both reached the same conclusion simultaneously. "Maintenance," Jake said. "Food service," Nix countered at the exact same moment. They stared at each other. Then Jake snapped his fingers. "Sarah, the new cook from Europa Station." "The timing aligns with the sabotage preparations," Nix agreed, fingers flying over her terminal. Arriving just 2 weeks ago, she would have had sufficient time to study the station layout and security procedures. Jake was already pulling up personnel records. "Let's see. Sarah Navis, transferred from Europa Mining Colony. Wait, there's something off here." He expanded the file, examining the details more closely. "Her transfer documentation is complete, but the authentication codes don't match Europa's current protocols. They're using an outdated format." Nix leaned forward. "The Europa station updated their security protocols 63 days ago, following a data breach. If these codes are outdated, then they're forged," Jake finished grimly. "Our new cook isn't from Europa at all." "We should inform Supervisor Krell immediately," Nix said, reaching for the communication panel. Jake caught her wrist. "Wait. If we alert security now, we might spook her before we know what she's after or if she has accomplices." Nix considered this, then nodded slowly. "A valid strategic assessment. What do you propose?" "We keep watching her, gather concrete evidence, and we need to check if there have been any unusual communications from the station recently." "I can access the communications log," Nix said, turning back to her terminal. "Though it will require bypassing certain security protocols." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You can do that." A hint of pride colored Nix's voice. "Vexians are known for their technical aptitudes. I specialized in communication systems before transferring to mining operations." "Is there anything you can't do?" Jake asked, half jokingly. Nix paused, giving him a look that made his heart skip. "Understand human flirtation, apparently." Before Jake could respond to this unexpected display of humor, Nix's terminal chimed. "Found something. 3 unauthorized narrowband transmissions in the past week, disguised as routine system diagnostics, all originating from the kitchen supply terminal." "That's our proof," Jake said excitedly. "What were the transmissions?" "Encrypted, but the timing corresponds with..." Nix frowned, pulling up another screen. The maintenance schedule for Sector 12. The first transmission occurred immediately after the cooling system's routine inspection. She was sending them the vulnerability assessments, Jake realized, telling them exactly where to hit us. And the final transmission was sent yesterday, 4 hours before the incident. Jake leaned back, processing the implications. So she sabotaged the cooling system, using the weakness she identified. But why? What's the endgame here? Nix was quiet for a moment, thinking. The Facium. Vega 9 has the largest known deposit in this sector. If she could create a significant enough distraction, she could steal some during the evacuation, Jake finished. The containment breach wasn't just a distraction. It was cover for theft. Nix's fingers flew over her terminal again. Checking inventory logs. Confirmed. 8 kilograms of processed Facium are unaccounted for from Secure Storage Unit 3. Jake whistled. 8 kilos? That's worth approximately 22 million Earth credits on the black market, Nix supplied. Enough to justify considerable risk. She must have accomplices, Jake said, standing to pace the small room despite his protesting muscles. No way she's moving that much Facium alone. And she'll need transport off-station. The supply freighter, Nix realized, pulling up the station's schedule. It departs in 6 hours. With the confusion from yesterday's incident, security protocols for outgoing cargo have been minimized to prioritize essential functions. Jake felt a surge of urgency. We need to move now. If she gets that Facium off station, we should inform Supervisor Krell, Nix insisted. This is beyond our investigative mandate. There's no time, Jake argued. We need to find her now, before she disappears. Once we have evidence in hand, then we call Krell. Nix hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and practicality. Finally, she nodded. Very well. But we proceed with caution. If she is indeed working for the Orion Syndicate, she may be armed and dangerous. Jake grinned. Good thing I've got a Vexian watching my back. Then, for a brief moment, something warm and almost tender passed between them. Then, with synchronized purpose, they headed for the door, their earlier awkwardness replaced by focused determination. The corridor outside was bustling with repair crews addressing the damage from yesterday's incident. Jake and Nix moved through the chaos with deliberate casualness, making their way toward the kitchen facilities. If I were hiding stolen Facium, Jake murmured, where would I stash it? Somewhere radiation-shielded but accessible, Nix replied quietly. The kitchen has industrial freezers with lead lining to protect food from potential contamination. Perfect hiding spot, Jake agreed. Let's check there first. They were approaching the mess hall when Jake spotted a familiar figure ahead, Sarah Navis, carrying a large insulated container toward the cargo bays. Her movements were hurried, furtive, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings. Jake pulled Nix into a maintenance alcove. There she is, and that container. Standard kitchen transport unit, Nix observed. But the radiation signature? She tapped her gauntlet, activating a specialized sensor. Faint, but present. That's Facium. She's moving it to the supply freighter now, Jake realized. We need to intercept her before she reaches the cargo bay. Wait, Nix cautioned, pointing to a security camera. If we confront her here, she might have time to alert accomplices. We should follow her, identify any conspirators, then apprehend them all simultaneously. Jake nodded, impressed by her tactical thinking. Lead the way. They shadowed Sarah through the station's corridors, maintaining a safe distance, using service passages where possible to avoid detection. The woman moved with purpose, clearly familiar with the station's layout despite her supposedly recent arrival. She bypassed the main cargo bay, instead heading toward a secondary loading dock used for perishable supplies. The area was deserted. Most personnel were still dealing with the aftermath of the Sector 12 incident. This doesn't make sense, Jake whispered, as they watched from behind a stack of supply crates. The supply freighter docks at the main bay, not here. Unless she's not using the supply freighter, Nix replied grimly. Look. Through the viewport, they could see a small craft docked at the exterior airlock, unmarked, with a sleek design that spoke of speed, rather than cargo capacity. Private transport, Jake muttered. Probably has a scrambled identification signature, too. Classic syndicate operation. Sarah approached a control panel, entering a sequence that caused the inner airlock door to slide open. She stepped inside with her container, the door closing behind her. Now, Nix urged, already moving. Before she completes the handoff. They sprinted to the airlock controls. Jake immediately recognized that the security protocols had been bypassed. She's overridden the system. I can't access the airlock controls remotely. Stand aside, Nix said, removing her gauntlets and placing her bare orange hands directly on the control panel. Jake watched in amazement as her fingers seemed to merge with the interface, manipulating the circuits directly through some innate Vexian ability he'd never witnessed before. The panel sparked, then the airlock door slid open. Sarah stood frozen in surprise, the container half-handed to a tall, thin humanoid whose chalk-white skin marked him as syndicate muscle. Behind them, the small ship's cargo hold was already open, revealing stacks of similar containers. "Station security!" Jake bluffed, having no official authority but hoping to create confusion. "Step away from the shipment!" The syndicate operative reacted instantly, shoving Sarah aside and drawing a weapon. Nix moved with blinding speed, her bare hand striking the man's wrist with precision. The weapon clattered to the floor as he howled in pain. Sarah recovered quickly, lunging for the fallen weapon. Jake intercepted her, but underestimated her training. She twisted in his grasp, delivering a sharp elbow to his still tender ribs. Pain exploded through his torso, momentarily disabling him. "You fools!" Sarah snarled, her affected kitchen worker demeanor replaced by cold professionalism. "Do you have any idea who you're interfering with?" "The Orion Syndicate," Nix replied calmly, positioning herself between Sarah and the weapon. "Your affiliations are irrelevant. You will not leave this station with stolen facium." Sarah laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You think it's about the facium? This is just the beginning. Vega 9 has been targeted for a complete takeover. The Syndicate needs this outpost for its strategic location." "Then, we're even more motivated to stop you," Jake said, recovering his stance despite the pain. The standoff was interrupted by the ship's systems, initiating an automated departure sequence. The external airlock door began to open, causing emergency force fields to activate along the inner threshold. "We're out of time," the Syndicate operative growled to Sarah. "Finish them and let's go." Sarah made her move, diving for the weapon with unexpected agility. Jake lunged to intercept her, but his injured body betrayed him. He stumbled, leaving the path clear. What happened next occurred so quickly that Jake could barely process it. Nix launched herself forward, her injured leg buckling, but her momentum carrying her into Sarah. Both women crashed against the airlock wall. The force field flickered as they struggled at its edge, dangerously close to the now opening exterior door. "Nix!" Jake shouted, seeing her precarious position. With a desperate surge of strength, he threw himself toward them, grabbing Nix's arm just as Sarah shoved her toward the opening. Jake pulled with everything he had, yanking Nix back to safety while Sarah lost her balance. The woman teetered at the edge of the force field, eyes wide with sudden fear. The Syndicate operative reached for her, but too late. With a silent scream, Sarah slipped through the weakened field and was sucked out toward the cold emptiness of space. The Syndicate man lunged for the ship controls, but Nix was faster. Her bare hand slammed onto the emergency lockdown panel, sealing the external airlock and trapping the small craft in place. Seconds later, the station's security forces, finally alerted by the airlock's emergency protocols, stormed the area, weapons trained on the Syndicate operative. Jake sank to his knees, adrenaline giving way to pain and exhaustion. Beside him, Nix collapsed, her injured leg finally giving out completely. As security personnel swarmed around them, securing the fascium and the captured operative, Jake found Nix's hand and squeezed it gently. Her fingers, surprisingly warm and soft without the gauntlets, returned the pressure. "Nice teamwork," he managed through labored breaths.
"Indeed," she replied softly. "We appear to be compatible."
Despite everything, the pain, the danger, the chaos, Jake found himself laughing. Coming from Nix, it was practically a declaration. Oh. The medical bay was becoming uncomfortably familiar territory for Jake. This time, however, he and Nix occupied adjacent beds, their conditions deemed stable, but warranting observation after their confrontation with the syndicate operatives. "I must admit," Supervisor Krell said, his bulbous green face contorted in what might have been admiration. "Your unorthodox methods produced results. 8 kilograms of phasium recovered, a syndicate operative in custody, and we've identified 3 more station personnel involved in the conspiracy." "The woman, Sarah?" Jake asked. Krell's expression darkened. "Emergency retrieval recovered her body. Death from vacuum exposure was instantaneous." Jake felt a twinge of regret despite everything. Death in the vacuum of space was a fate he wouldn't wish on anyone. "The important thing," Krell continued, "is that you prevented a major security breach. The Syndicate has been trying to establish a foothold in this sector for years. This station's strategic position makes it valuable beyond just the phasium deposits." "What happens now?" Nix asked, her voice stronger than it had been the previous day. "Now," Krell said, "you both get proper rest. And then, assuming medical clearance, you'll be permanently reassigned to the Security Oversight Committee. Your unique partnership has proven effective. It would be inefficient not to utilize it." After Krell departed, a comfortable silence settled between them. Jake found himself studying Nix's profile, seeing it with new awareness. The subtle contours of her orange face, the expressiveness of her golden eyes that he'd previously missed, the quiet strength in her slender frame. "You're staring," she observed without looking at him. "Sorry," Jake said, not feeling particularly apologetic. "Just seeing things I should have noticed a long time ago." She turned to face him then. "Such as?" "How you always position yourself where you can see both me and the exit. How you calibrate equipment to my specifications without being asked. How you bring that awful Vexian tea every third shift because you noticed I was more alert after drinking it." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "You find the tea distasteful? Yet you consumed it regularly." Jake shrugged, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his bandages. "I thought you were being polite. I didn't want to offend you." "Well, I was interpreting your acceptance as reciprocation of interest," Nix said, comprehension dawning. "A perfect example of our cultural misalignment. Something we should probably work on," Jake suggested. "If we're going to be permanent partners on this security committee." "Yes," Nix agreed softly. "I believe that would be wise." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the soft beeping of medical equipment. "The 3 moons," Jake said suddenly, remembering. "We missed seeing them align." "There will be other alignments," Nix assured him. "Vega 9 experiences a triple lunar alignment approximately every 42 Earth days." "Still," Jake said, "I was looking forward to it, to hearing about its significance in Vexian culture." Nix hesitated, then carefully swung her legs over the side of her bed. Her movements were stiff, but determined as she crossed the small space between their beds. "In Vexian tradition," she said, sitting carefully on the edge of his bed, "the alignment of 3 celestial bodies represents harmony between mind, body, and spirit. It is considered an auspicious time to forge new connections or deepen existing ones." Jake felt his heartbeat quicken as she placed her bare hand, no gauntlet, atop his. "I think we've already started that process, alignment or not." "Perhaps," she agreed. But there is much we still need to learn about each other. I'd like that, Jake said, turning his hand to intertwine his fingers with hers. 5 human digits, meshing with 6 Vexian ones, in a perfect fit. Maybe you could start by explaining exactly what signals I've been missing these past 3 years. The dark orange blush returned to Nix's cheeks. That might require extensive cultural education. I've got time, Jake assured her. Plenty of it. As the station hummed around them, continuing its ceaseless operations, Jake realized that for the first time since arriving on Vega 9, he felt like he might have found something worth staying for beyond just the paycheck. In this harsh, unforgiving environment, against all odds, something precious and unexpected had begun to take root. And maybe, just maybe, it had all been worth one smashed control panel. 6 weeks later, Jake stood before the newly installed control panel in Room 7, running final diagnostics on the upgraded systems. The equipment was state-of-the-art, a small reward from station management for their role in thwarting the syndicate plot. All parameters normal, Nix confirmed from her station, her gauntleted fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the holographic interface. Phasium extraction rates stable at optimal levels. Jake nodded, still marveling at how seamlessly they worked together now. Their time on the Security Oversight Committee had forged them into an even more effective team, their different perspectives and abilities complementing rather than conflicting. First committee meeting is in 20 minutes, he reminded her. Krell wants our assessment of the new security protocols. I have prepared a comprehensive evaluation, Nix replied, though I believe he will find our suggested improvements expensive. Jake grinned. That's why you're presenting them. He's less likely to argue with you. Because I am Vexian, she asked, a hint of amusement in her golden eyes. Because you're terrifying when you're right about something, Jake corrected, earning a small smile from his partner. Partner. The word had taken on new dimensions in recent weeks. They were partners professionally, now officially recognized as a security team. And they were exploring what partnership meant in other contexts as well, navigating the complex intersection of human and Vexian cultural expectations with careful deliberation. Their first official date, observing the triple lunar alignment as initially planned, had been a revelation for both of them. Jake had learned about Vexian courtship traditions, while Nix had experienced her first taste of human romantic gestures when Jake presented her with a small crystal he'd fashioned from processed phasium residue. Now, as they prepared for their committee meeting, Jake watched Nix make a final adjustment to the control panel, remembering how differently things had begun 6 weeks earlier, with her fist smashing through a similar panel. "What are you thinking about?" Nix asked, noticing his distraction. "Just reflecting on how one misunderstanding led to all of this," Jake replied honestly. "If you hadn't smashed that control panel—" "If you hadn't mentioned Sarah," Nix countered, a teasing lilt to her voice that would have been unimaginable weeks ago. "If Morgan hadn't explained Vexian courting signals to me, if Supervisor Krell hadn't assigned us to investigate together." They shared a moment of silent acknowledgement for the strange, winding path that had brought them here. "I've been meaning to ask," Jake said as they gathered their materials for the meeting. "That day in the control room, what exactly did I say that pushed you over the edge? Was it really just mentioning Sarah?" Nix hesitated, then removed her left gauntlet. A gesture Jake now understood represented vulnerability and trust in Vexian culture. "You said her cooking was the best thing to happen to this rock since they discovered phasium," she explained. "In Vexian courting traditions, comparing another potential mate favorably to a precious resource is particularly hurtful." Jake winced. "And I had no idea. I'm sorry." "You could not have known," Nix assured him, her bare hand briefly touching his. "And in retrospect, the incident forced us to acknowledge what might have remained unspoken for another 3 years. So really, I should be thanking you for destroying expensive equipment," Jake teased. "Perhaps. A mischievous glint appeared in her golden eyes. "Though I would not recommend repeating the experiment. Supervisor Krell has only so much patience." Jake laughed, the sound echoing comfortably in the control room that had witnessed the beginning of their journey. As they headed toward their committee meeting, walking side by side down the station's corridors, he reflected on how alien this environment, and Nyx herself, had once seemed to him. Now, surrounded by the familiar sulfurous scent, the humming machinery, and the quiet presence of his Vexian partner, Jake Harlow felt something he hadn't expected to find on this remote mining outpost. He felt at home. "The three moons align again tonight," Nyx mentioned casually as they approached the meeting room. Jake glanced at her, catching the subtle invitation in her tone. "Observation deck after shift?" "I would find that acceptable," she replied, the formal Vexian phrasing belied by the warmth in her eyes. As they entered the meeting room, greeted by Supervisor Krell and the other committee members, Jake felt a profound sense of anticipation for the future, both the immediate challenge of securing the station and the longer, more intricate journey of building something meaningful with the extraordinary orange-skinned alien who had, quite literally, smashed her way into his heart. Life on Vega 9, it seemed, was just beginning to get interesting.